Welcome to this edition of Tuesday Talks with Twyla. So, if you remember last week, we talked about the thought audit and the process to basically just audit our thoughts to figure out what we're thinking, what's going on in our minds, and that process of just the thought audit. And I told you that I would follow up with what to do after you've completed the thought audit. So, the purpose of the thought audit is to build that awareness around what we're thinking. And so if you do those exercises and you reveal the thoughts that you're thinking, either in just a complete thought download where you're unloading everything, or intermittently when you're doing the check-ins and asking yourself, what am I thinking right now? Once you have that information, right, that process alone changes things, right? Because as soon as we change our position, our perspective, and we shift it, we're looking at our thoughts. We are no longer just thinking the thoughts, right? You're not just experiencing them. You have stepped back and changed your perspective so that you can look at your thoughts, right? And so that awareness piece, once we've discovered, once we've revealed, once we've built that awareness around what we're thinking, now what, right? What do we want to do with them? And that's the question. Now what? What do you want to do with what you discovered? Because that's the best news here. It's a choice. It's always a choice. So there might be times where you're thinking something that is causing discomfort, that maybe is causing sadness, or maybe is causing some, you know, what we would consider like a negative emotion, right? Sadness, grief, maybe even some anger. But you might have some thoughts that create those types of feelings and you want to think them, and that's okay, right? The process of becoming aware of it is so that we just feel like we're in control of it, because we are, but we're not when we're just living at the expense of or living at the effect of our thoughts without consciously being aware of what they are and choosing them intentionally. That's the part that changes our lives, when we decide on purpose what we want to think, because that is what impacts our emotional experience, which is the way we experience life. So that's how we get to decide how our life experience is. And so when you've got your thought audit complete and you start looking at it and you start making decisions around it, it's not just to say that we're going to throw out the whole thing and we're going to start all over. It's to really look at what's going on in our mind and why. Where does it come from? Is some of it just programmed beliefs or programmed thinking that really just kind of happen like an automatic thought? We wake up in the morning and this is what we're thinking. And once we become aware of that, we can say, okay, first thing in the morning, I would like to think something more positive, more powerful, more impactful in a positive way for my day. So instead of thinking, oh, I have so much to do today, which this is the pattern I found myself in, was I just was always telling myself I have so much to do and I can't get it all done. And it was just that flavor of overwhelm, of just telling myself, I have so much to do. What am I forgetting? I can't get it all done. How am I going to do all this? Right? It was just this spiral of negativity around what I had really morphed into. I have, just all of this to do, all of this overwhelm. And it just, was first thing in the morning and all day long. And I was feeding that. And of course, I had a busy job and I had a busy life and I had a busy family. And so I had things, right? Like I had a lot of things to do, but telling myself that I had more than I could handle and that it was too much and it was so much, right? That flavor of it, that story I was telling myself, set me up for overwhelm first thing in the morning, because that's what I would feel. I would feel stress and overwhelm, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this all done? I can't do all of this. Like that's how I would start my day. And when you take a look at that, you can decide maybe you want to think something different. Because if you decide to start the day with a thought like, I'm going to get my priorities done today, and I just know I'm going to get my priorities done today. I'm committed to getting my priorities done. I will get my priorities done today. Or what I get done is what I get done. Like whatever statement or story or sentence serves you and makes you feel something other than stress and overwhelm first thing in the morning, right? So I get to choose that because whether I had, a slow day of like maybe only, five things that absolutely had to be done that day, or if I actually had a very overwhelming schedule that day, I was telling myself the exact same story every single day, even on Saturdays and Sundays, right? Like even on my weekends, on my time off, I still was just carrying that story. And I left that stressful job and I carried the story into my business where I control my schedule, where I control everything. I was still telling myself that story. I can't get this all done. I've got too much to do. And I just, I had to get a grip on that, right? I had to decide that I'm not going to tell myself this story anymore because it's creating all of this stress and overwhelm that's unnecessary. I control my schedule. If I only want to do one thing today, if I want to do nothing today, I get to decide that. There's no manager, there's no supervisor, there's no boss, there's no, right? Like there's no one else telling me what my schedule is. I pick it for myself. So if I want it to be a calm, relaxing day, I get to create that. Right? But it's not going to feel calm and relaxing if I'm telling myself this overwhelming story. So once you have your thought audit, that's when you get to make all the decisions. You get to decide for yourself exactly what you want to tell yourself, exactly which thoughts you want to be thinking. And you might want to start with, how do I want to feel every day? How do I want to feel this day in my life? What stories do I need to eliminate? What programmed thoughts that just come up out of nowhere do I need to get a handle on? Right? Once you have all of this thought audit, all of this information, you can make those decisions. That's the purpose of doing the audit. You become aware and you get to decide. So there might be, like I said, there might be things that you want to keep. If you're having some sadness about somebody that you miss, a lost loved one, or your child goes off to college, right? You might have some thoughts that create some of those, if you want to call them negative emotions, right? But that's okay, right? Like you're okay with that. And so you would choose that again, but you choose it intentionally. You choose it consciously, right? And then, you go through and you make decisions and you keep the ones you want to keep and you decide which ones you want to change. And then the process for choosing our thoughts, deciding and choosing our thoughts is as simple as I'm not going to think this anymore, right? That's what I did with the story I was telling myself first thing in the morning. I just told myself, I'm not thinking this anymore. It doesn't match my reality. It doesn't create, uh, a productive day for me. It just makes me feel awful. And it's unnecessary suffering because it's not even my reality. It's not even true. Now, if your circumstances haven't changed like mine have, I could have changed the story back when I was still working my stressful job, right? I could have gotten a handle on this. I could have become aware of it and made decisions then. And my work experience would have been completely different, right? Because I could have backed it up with evidence to say, okay, you actually only have three things that absolutely have to get done today. Or I could have taken my list and said, okay, you're going to prioritize these three things today. You're only going to put on your plate three things that you're going to work on today. And I could have managed my schedule. I still could have done that, right? Like we're way more in charge of our lives, of our schedules, of how we do these things than what we give ourselves credit for. So I should have done this work while I was still in my stressful job. I could have, I should have, but I didn't. But if you find yourself where your circumstances aren't going to change, you can still change your thinking around it and feel better about your reality. Because just telling yourself a painful story, like that was serving me no purpose. That was creating overwhelm every single day, even on a slow day, right? I just was creating that for myself. Even if I went into the office and it was just happened to be a really slow day, maybe some staff were out and it was just a slow, quiet day, didn't have a lot of interruptions, maybe didn't have a lot of customers or phone calls or emails coming in. It was just a slow day, right? I still carried and created all of that overwhelm for myself unnecessarily. And that's my biggest passion with the coaching that I do is when we create our own unnecessary suffering. I just want to make sure that you hear me screaming from the rooftops that there's a better way, there's a different way. And sometimes it's not as easy as just hearing it and taking it and running, right? Like if you listen to or go back and watch a lot of my Tuesday talks, a lot of these concepts are the same, but I try to, put a different example with it, give you a different story, talk about it differently, because that's what's brought me through this journey, right? Like all the different coaches that I work with, sometimes someone will say something just so slightly different, or the story they give to back it up just lands differently. And I realize I've heard this before, I understand this concept, or I know this, and yet the way the concept lands, I'm able to actually get behind it, take action, and change my experience, right? And that's my hope for you. So you might notice that you hear some commonalities or some familiar terminology or familiar concepts here because I want to make sure that I'm providing as much value as I possibly can so that you can make the changes in your life that you want to. And that's the thing, it's all a choice, right? And so there are times where we choose not to make the changes, right? We lose a loved one and we want to grieve, we want to feel sad. And sometimes someone wants to feel that way for a short period of time, and sometimes we want to feel that way for a very long period of time, right? And we get to decide that for ourselves. And people around us might tell us that we're doing it wrong or we're not doing it like they did, or you might compare yourself to someone else that did it differently, right? But our journey is ours to decide. My goal is just to make sure that you know and understand that there is a choice there because it can feel like it's not a choice, right? It can feel like it's happening to us, right? I would have described my experience as I'm waking up with, right? Like that's what wakes me up in the morning is the dread, the overwhelm, the stress, right? Like that's what would wake me up. And so it felt like it was happening to me, right? And so when I got a grip of this, when I got my awareness around it, and I was like, okay, what's actually happening is this is the story I'm telling myself. And it can be challenging to find this story. So give yourself some grace, give yourself some time. That's why I gave you a couple of options for doing the thought work because sometimes there might be an exercise that just doesn't work for you. There are times where if I go to journal or I grab my journal first thing in the morning and I do that regularly, there are times where my mind is as blank as the page. And if I'm feeling like, okay, I really need to do this, then I'll, find the techniques, I'll practice some techniques to kind of get the ball rolling and get the thoughts flowing and, I'll work on it. Other times it's like, yeah, I don't feel like putting in the effort today, and I close the journal and I leave it for another day. So it's all a choice, but I want to give you options so that you might find something that works for you. So the check-ins, the intermittent check-ins where we're asking ourselves what we're thinking, that's how I caught the thought, right? Like I was probably working on something different and I realized this is the story I'm telling myself. And probably I heard somebody else say that they were telling themselves that story. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm telling myself. Like I'm telling myself that. This is my best example. I was telling myself that like it was the news, like it was the facts, like it was the truth, like it was my circumstance. And it wasn't. It felt that way, right? When I was waking up with dread first thing in the morning, it felt that way. And it pushed me to make the decision to leave my job. And maybe, I have no idea, right? Hindsight is 2020. Had I changed my story, I might have stayed longer. I have no idea. But I just want to make sure that you know that that's what's available to you. You have available to you to make the decisions and make the changes in your life, in your thoughts, in your feelings, in how you experience your life right now without changing your circumstances, without leaving your job, without leaving your spouse, without, leaving a friend, whatever it is. You have agency over all of that. And these are the tools that you can practice to put this into place. Okay. So if you decide to make some changes to the thoughts or you want to write a new story, so for me, this was a long-standing story. This was a unconscious, this was just like happening on replay, right? It was one of those automatic thoughts, like driving to the grocery store. I don't have to think about it very hard. I can just jump in my car and, take myself to the grocery store. I had to be very intentional because I knew that every day, multiple times a day, this was just playing on replay in the back of my mind. So I had to be very intentional about changing this story. So, what did I want to experience every day? What did I want to feel every day? Right? I get to decide that. And you get to decide that for yourself. When you're ready to change the story, you get to change it to whatever you want, right? That should be very exciting because it's our life experience. So we get to decide. And maybe you start with, how do I want to feel every day? I wanted to feel peace. I wanted to feel calm. I wanted to feel in control, in charge. I wanted to feel organized. I wanted to feel like I knew what I needed to do. And that if I only wanted to do one thing, I could. If I wanted to do 10 things, I could. But I decided I could just approach it with calm and organization and peace. And it wasn't this overwhelming, stressful, all these things to do scenario. It just wasn't. And even if I had a lot to do, I didn't have to think of it that way. I could decide how much of it I was going to commit to or schedule or work on, right? So you get to decide the story for yourself. And if the first thing that pops into your mind is, I have no idea, right? So use some visualization, use some tools that might create an idea for you. What would your most peaceful day look like? What would a perfect day at the office look like? And give yourself, just ask some questions that gives yourself permission to dream, to visualize, to imagine. Use your imagination. We did this all the time as kids, right? Drum up all of those tools, re-energize those functions that we have inside of us. Imagine, right? Ask yourself, what would a perfect whatever look like? What would a perfect day look like? What would a perfect day at the office look like? What would a perfect job look like? Right? How would I feel? How would I show up? What would I be doing? For some people, like sitting at a desk all day sounds awful. And for some people, doing something with their hands all day sounds awful. So we know that we have characteristics or tendencies towards things that we like and things that we don't like, right? So lean on that and explore, get curious, right? Allow this to be a time where you really open up the ideas of possibilities, of examples, dreams, ideas, right? Everything. You're being curious. You're exploring. You're imagining. You're visualizing. And you find some things you like and you find some things you don't like. And then you know I like this, so I go kind of this direction. Oh, there's part of this I don't like, so maybe I go back this direction, right? You get to decide all of it. And there's no hurry, right? It's not like, okay, last week I did this and then this week I have to do this. No, you do this at your own pace. This might take a while, right? I mean, I knew what I wanted kind of my perfect day to feel like and maybe look like, but I spent some time really exploring like what is that exactly? What would I want to tell myself? What would I want to feel every day? How do I want to set my days up? Right? I get to decide all of that. And I gave myself time to explore it. And you might have where you're going from, like I did, something that was significant. And it was like, I kind of want to call it like this blanket thought, right? Like it just started the day and it was there. I carried it with me all day. And so I knew it was significant in that it started first thing in the morning and I carried with it me all day long. So I just allowed myself to be like, okay, at this time of the day or that time of the day, or what if I had something that wasn't that negative and overwhelming, but maybe wasn't to my perfect day? Where would I be if I was somewhere in the middle? Somewhere more neutral, maybe not, maybe neutral, positive, but not like perfect, right? Like not the perfect day. I didn't go from the worst, most overwhelming day to the perfect day, right? But what would I be thinking? What would I be feeling if I created a good day, right? And so you might have to play around with what we call ladder thoughts. What would be something that would move the needle, that would get me out of this pit, let's say, and it moves me at least in the positive direction. It doesn't swing the pendulum completely, but it is a believable, doable thought that feels better or feels good. And I can, maybe try that on for size. And so just know that any work that you do in this area is progress because when it's just happening to us, that's not progress, right? That's just like existing. And so when you're intentional, even if you're intentional by moving the needle just the tiniest bit, you're being intentional. And here's the thing. When you're doing that, when you have, first of all, when you do the work of changing your perspective to look at your thoughts, you've changed. But just the act of practicing, setting the intention, thinking thoughts on purpose, right? You're flexing that muscle. Even if you're just moving the needle the tiniest bit, you're doing the work, right? You're you're lifting the weight. And it's not like you lift it once and you've got this bulging bicep, right? That's not how lifting works. It's small, repetitive repetitions, right? It's consistent work. It's doing the work. And so you're teaching your brain, you're teaching yourself, I can set intentions. I can think thoughts on purpose, right? You're learning this work as you do it. And you're teaching yourself, right? Like, so I did it with, I've been using this one example, but that wasn't the only time I was intentional about my thoughts, right? There's a lot of times that we have to be very intentional about our thoughts. And so when we teach ourselves these tools, these are things we can practice when you do have like a complete catastrophe at work, or you have a family emergency, or you have like all of a sudden, a bunch of chaotic tasks dumped on you, right? How you manage your mind, how you think intentionally in those moments, that's how you change your experience. And when we're doing this work just regularly every day or once a week or whatever interval that you do this work, as you do it, you're learning how to do these things. You're learning how to be intentional. You're learning how to set intentions, right? You're learning all of this, you're practicing it, you're putting it into practice, you're taking the steps, you're taking action in the direction to make the changes that you want to see in your life. So you're learning it. You're changing yourself. You're changing and evolving. You're getting better at it. You know, you're learning, you're changing, your life is changing. And literally, just as you do each exercise, you're changing, right? Because as soon as you do the thought audit, you've changed your perspective. You've changed, right? And now you come in and you get to look at things and evaluate the thoughts and make decisions around them. That changes you. Because once you know, right? You can't unknow it. I mean, there might be times where you end up with another go-to thought or family of thoughts, and you don't realize that you've slipped into that, right? That's what happened to me. I didn't realize I was telling myself that story. So that can happen again, but you'll know what to do. When you realize where you're at or what's happening, you'll know exactly what to do because these are the exercises you're doing now. So if you don't find yourself kind of stuck in one of these stories, but you're just trying to figure out like, what is my everyday life, you're doing the exercises, right? You're learning these tools by practicing them, right? So last week was thought audit. This week is evaluating the thoughts, making decisions around them, and really just like that evaluation piece, right? And so it's kind of like the audit report because you have the audit which displays everything and then you have the evaluation of that information and you have the awareness of everything and you have the evaluation, you have the decisions. Do I want to think that? Do I not want to think that? And then if I don't want to think that, what do I want to think instead? And I can make some decisions around some intentional thought creation, right? So next week, we're going to talk more in depth about how do we exercise intentional thought creation. Because sometimes this can be challenging, even for me. Like, I know I don't want to think that, but then what do I want to think, right? And like I said, it's whatever we want. But then it's like, well, yeah, but like, what do I want? Right? So, what is intentional thought creation? And how do we figure out what we want? I've been seeing a lot of information on this. And so I'm very excited to bring this to you because I feel like it's something that we all struggle with. What do we want and how do we find out what that is? How do we figure out what that is? Because that's the key to everything, right? It's like you want to set a goal, but you have no idea what it is, then you have no way of knowing if you achieved it, right? And so if we don't know what we want, it's really hard to get there if we don't know what it is. So that'll be next week. So take your thought audit. And if you didn't watch that one or listen to that one, go back and grab that, do the thought audit, and then do your intentional thoughts, your intentional thought creation, do your evaluation, do your decision making around the thoughts. Really take a look at, okay, now that I know all this, what do I want to think? And do I want to think this? What do I want to think instead? What's available to me, right? What is this creating in my life? You get to evaluate and review all of that and make decisions around it. That is the power of having the awareness of the information is to make decisions around it. So I would love to hear how this is going for you. If you get stuck on anything, of course, reach out. Some of this work can be vulnerable, right? Because there's times where we discover stuff that maybe we were avoiding or we weren't wanting to actually feel or process. And so with any of this work, it can open some wounds or feel uncomfortable or create discomfort or create more, I don't want to say create more confusion because it really does open up the windows of possibility. But sometimes when we have a lot of options, then we're not good at making decisions. And so we don't know what to do. So if that happens, if any of those things happen or any challenges or concerns you have or questions about any of this work, please do just reach out and let me know. I would be honored to help you through this journey. Until next week, when we talk about intentional thought creation, I hope you have an amazing week. We'll see you next week.